He stood under the morning sun, wiping the grease off his hands with a rag that was already too dirty to make a difference. The smell of jet fuel hung in the air, mixed with the faint scent of coffee from the hangar office. Every morning was the same for him, checking engines, tightening bolts, fixing what others overlooked. He didn't wear fancy clothes or talk much. He just worked quietly, patiently, and with care. At the small private airfield, he was known as the guy who could fix anything with an engine. But no one really looked at him beyond that. To most people, he was just the mechanic, covered in grease with dirt under his nails and a face that showed more hours of work than sleep. That morning, he thought it would be another ordinary day. But it wasn't. The sound of a private jet filled the air, louder, rougher than usual. The other mechanics looked up, shading their eyes as the jet approached the runway. Something about it seemed wrong. The landing was uneven, shaky. The plane touched down too hard, bouncing before the tires caught. Then came the message from the tower, an emergency landing. Everyone ran toward the hangar. The jet rolled to a stop and the door opened. Out stepped a tall woman wearing sunglasses and a sharp suit. She looked like she came from a different world, a world of money, power, and people who never got their hands dirty. Her security and assistants rushed around her, speaking into radios and phones. While she tried to stay calm, that woman was Isabella Hayes, the owner of a large tech company and one of the most powerful businesswomen in the country. She was supposed to fly to a major event in another city, but now her plane had almost failed mid-air. The head mechanic froze. He didn't want to take the risk of touching such a valuable aircraft. "It's too risky," he whispered to his team. "We could mess something up and get blamed for it." But Ethan didn't think twice. He grabbed his toolbox and walked straight toward the jet. Isabella barely noticed him at first. She was frustrated, talking to her pilot and assistant, demanding answers. How could this happen? "This plane just had maintenance done last week," she said. Ethan didn't interrupt. He knelt by the wing, running his hand along the metal surface, feeling for heat, for pressure, for anything unusual. His eyes scanned every corner of the landing gear and engine casing. The other mechanics hung back, watching him work. When Isabella finally looked over, she saw him crawling under the plane, his shirt already stained, his face smeared with oil. "Who is that?" she asked one of her staff. "Just a mechanic, ma'am," they said. She frowned. "Just a mechanic?" Ethan didn't hear them. He had found something small but dangerous. A faint fuel smell that shouldn't have been there. He followed it to a cracked line near the rear connection. It was leaking slowly, nearly invisible to the eye, but deadly if the plane took off again. He stood up and called out, "Nobody start this plane." "It's not safe." The pilot turned to him, frowning. "What are you talking about?" "It's just a small leak. We'll top it off." Ethan shook his head. "No. If you start the engine now, the pressure will burst this line. You could lose the whole wing." Everyone went quiet. Isabella stepped forward, lowering her sunglasses. For the first time, she looked him straight in the eye. "Are you certain?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's about to fail. Give me 30 minutes and I'll fix it." Her assistant whispered something to her, probably about schedule, delays, and meetings. But she ignored him. She crossed her arms, watching Ethan walk back to his truck for parts. Inside the hangar, the other mechanics whispered among themselves. "He's crazy," one said. "If he messes this up, he's finished." But Ethan didn't care about that. He cared about the plane, about safety, and about doing things right. That's all he had ever cared about. He slid back under the aircraft, tightening clamps and replacing seals. The work was messy and hot, and the smell of fuel grew stronger. Sweat rolled down his neck, mixing with grease, but his hands stayed steady. He blocked out the noise of people around him. For those 30 minutes, it was just him and the machine. Every move he made had to be perfect. A mistake here could mean a fire, or worse. When he finally stood up, his shirt was soaked and his arms were black with grime. "It's fixed," he said quietly. "But I'd recommend doing a pressure test before starting the engine again." The pilot nodded reluctantly. They ran the test. The pressure level stabilized. The leak was gone. Everyone exhaled at once. Isabella walked closer, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. She studied him. The way he looked tired but calm. The way he had risked everything to make sure her plane was safe. "You really know what you're doing," she said softly. He gave a small shrug. "I just try to do my job right." She smiled faintly. Most people wouldn't risk stepping in like that. Ethan wiped his hands again, embarrassed by her attention. Most people don't like to get dirty, he said. But machines don't care what you look like. They just need someone who listens. Her expression softened. She wasn't used to hearing honesty like that. Everyone around her always tried to impress her or agree with her. But this man didn't seem to care who she was. He just spoke plainly, like a person who didn't measure worth by money or fame. The rest of her team started packing up, relieved that the danger had passed. But Isabella stayed for a moment longer, watching Ethan as he packed his tools. When she finally turned to leave, she looked back once more. He was standing near the plane, talking to one of the younger mechanics, explaining how to detect early leaks by smell and sound. His voice was calm and patient like a teacher. Something about him stayed with her as she climbed into her car. For the rest of that day, Ethan didn't think much about what had happened. He had done his job. That was enough. But as he walked home in the fading light, he couldn't shake the memory of the woman's eyes, sharp, curious, but kind. He wondered if someone like her could ever really see someone like him. And far away in the back seat of her car, Isabella found herself thinking about the man in the hangar. The one who didn't bow, didn't flatter, and didn't hesitate to get his hands dirty to save her plane. He didn't fit in her world. But for some reason, she couldn't stop wondering what kind of person he was beyond the grease and the silence. That night, while Ethan fell asleep listening to the hum of passing planes, she sat in her penthouse staring out at the city lights, replaying the moment when he shouted for everyone to stay back, the moment that might have saved her life. Neither of them knew it yet. But that small act of courage was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning came early for Ethan. The hangar smelled of metal and morning dew, the air still cool before the sun started burning down. He was already there before anyone else, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup while checking the notes he had made from the day before. The Billionaire's plane was still parked in the corner of the hangar, covered with a light layer of dust like a sleeping giant. He thought it would be gone by now. Usually jets like that didn't stay long, but Isabella's team had decided to keep it grounded until every system was inspected. The problem he found yesterday had shaken everyone more than they wanted to admit. As he walked around the plane, he ran his hand along the side of the engine, still feeling the faint warmth from its last landing. He didn't mind being the first to arrive and the last to leave. That was the kind of peace he understood. The quiet hum of engines, the smell of oil, the soft sound of tools clinking on metal. But his peace didn't last long. The sound of car tires on gravel made him turn around. A black car pulled up beside the hangar, and out stepped Isabella again. This time she wasn't wearing sunglasses or heels. She wore simple clothes, jeans, a jacket, and sneakers, but even then she looked like someone used to having the world listen when she spoke. Ethan froze for a second, surprised to see her again. He didn't think billionaires came back to the same small airfield twice. She gave a small smile. "You're here early," he nodded. "Always am." "I wanted to see the plane myself," she said, walking closer. "My pilot told me what you found yesterday. I thought I should thank you properly." Ethan wiped his hands with the same old rag and said, "You already did. You're safe, and that's enough." Her smile faded a little. She wasn't used to people who turned down attention. "Still," she said quietly, "I don't think you realize how bad it could have been. That plane carries millions in tech equipment, not to mention the people on board. If it had exploded?" She trailed off, shaking her head. He didn't look up. "I know," he said simply. "That's why I couldn't let it fly." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of a far-off plane echoing in the distance. Then she asked, "Would you mind if I watched you work for a bit?" He looked at her, surprised. "Watch me?" "Yes," she said with a soft smile. "You seem to know these machines better than anyone I've met. I'd like to understand what went wrong." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure. Just don't stand too close when I start testing pressure valves." She nodded and stepped back as he began his inspection. For the next hour, she quietly watched him work. His movements were steady, careful, like someone who respected every nut and bolt. He explained things without realizing it, talking more to himself than to her. Words like compression, flow rate, and valve alignment filled the air. But what caught her attention most wasn't the technical part. It was how he treated the machine like it was alive, something worth protecting. After a while, she said softly, "You really love what you do, don't you?" He looked up from under the wing. "It's not about love," he said. "It's about doing it right. If I do my job wrong, people can get hurt. That's something I don't ever want on my conscience." Her eyes softened. "You take more responsibility than most CEOs I know," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe because I don't have anyone else to blame when things go wrong." Before she could answer, one of her assistants came rushing toward them from the hangar office. "Ma'am, the main system on the jet just sent a fault signal. It says the hydraulic pressure is dropping." Ethan's head snapped up. "That's not possible. I checked it this morning." The assistant pointed toward the screen on his tablet. "It's showing a warning right now." Ethan dropped his tools and ran toward the plane's nose. Isabella followed him, her steps quick. He climbed the ladder and opened the inspection panel. A hiss of air escaped. The pressure was indeed falling fast. Something inside was bleeding out the hydraulic fluid, and if it wasn't stopped soon, the whole system could fail. He muttered under his breath, "Where are you leaking from?" He reached inside the compartment, his hands moving fast, feeling for vibrations or heat. Then he saw it. A damaged hose that must have been weakened from the emergency landing yesterday. It hadn't broken then, but now it was seconds away from snapping. "Everyone back," he shouted. "If this blows, it'll spray fluid everywhere." People scrambled back except Isabella, who stayed a few steps behind him. He didn't have time to argue with her. He grabbed a clamp from his toolbox and pressed it against the line. The hiss slowed but didn't stop. He needed another clamp, a stronger one. "Hold this," he said, handing her a wrench without looking at her face. She took it immediately. He worked fast, tightening the line with both hands. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he fought to keep the pressure from bursting through. For a moment the sound was deafening. The hiss, the clang of metal, the pounding of his own heartbeat. And then, silence. The leak stopped. Ethan stepped back slowly, breathing hard. "It's stable," he said. But that was close. Isabella handed the wrench back to him. "You could have been hurt," she said. He wiped his face. "I've been hurt worse. The plane's fine. That's what matters." But she wasn't listening to the machine anymore. She was looking at him. At the man covered in grease and sweat who didn't hesitate to put himself in danger just to keep others safe. "You didn't even think twice," she said quietly. "You just acted," he shrugged. Thinking twice wastes time when something's about to break. For the rest of the day, Ethan worked nonstop to check the rest of the systems. Isabella stayed nearby, asking questions, trying to understand. The way he talked about engines reminded her of how she once felt about her company, full of purpose, before everything became about meetings and numbers. At one point, as the sun started to dip low, she said softly, "You know, people like you are rare." He looked up from the engine. "People like me? People who care about the small things," she said. "People who take pride in doing something right even when no one's watching." He gave a small laugh. "Maybe. But if the small things fail, the big things fall too." That night, when the plane finally passed every test, the tension in the hangar lifted. Isabella's pilot thanked Ethan and prepared for the flight the next morning. Isabella herself lingered by the plane door, watching the sky turn orange with the setting sun. "You really saved us twice," she said softly. "First the fuel line, now this." Ethan shook his head. "Just part of the job," she smiled gently. "You make it sound simple, but I've met people who couldn't do half of what you did today, even with a team of engineers." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "Sometimes it's not about the tools you have, it's about how much you care to fix it." Her eyes held his for a long second before she nodded. "You're right." As she turned to leave, she hesitated and said, "I'll be back tomorrow before takeoff. I'd like to see you run one last check." He nodded, not sure why she would want to return again, but something in her tone told him it wasn't just about the plane anymore. When she left, the hangar felt quieter than usual. The crew had gone home and the lights dimmed, leaving only the soft hum of the ceiling fans. Ethan sat on a crate staring at the plane he'd spent the last 2 days saving. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt tired, but in a good way. He didn't know that somewhere across town, Isabella sat by her window with a cup of tea, thinking not about business meetings or flight schedules, but about the man who risked everything just to make sure a machine, and the people inside it, stayed safe. That day had shown her something she hadn't seen in a long time. Real effort, honest work, and courage that didn't need to be announced. And for the first time in years, she found herself curious about someone who didn't belong to her world at all. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the hangar earlier than usual. The sky was pale with the first light and the air smelled faintly of dew and fuel. He sipped his coffee slowly, thinking about the previous day. The emergency had been intense, but it had passed. The plane was safe, and for him that was enough. Then he heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up on the gravel path outside. He turned and saw Isabella stepping out. She wasn't in her usual formal clothes. Today she wore a simple sweater, jeans, and sneakers, looking completely unlike the powerful woman whose name filled headlines. She carried a small notebook in her hand and had a thoughtful look on her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but clear. Ethan nodded. "Morning. You're early." "I wanted to watch the last check before takeoff," she said, giving a small smile. "And maybe understand a bit more about what you do." He studied her for a moment. Normally, he didn't mind who watched him. But something about the way she stood there, genuinely curious and not rushed or demanding, made him pause. He shrugged. "Sure. Just don't touch anything." She laughed lightly, and for a moment the tension that always seemed to surround her disappeared. She followed him as he went around the plane, inspecting the engines and hydraulic systems. As he worked, she asked questions. Not the kind people ask to seem smart, but questions that showed she truly wanted to understand. "How do you know when a line is about to fail?" she asked, leaning slightly over the wing. Ethan wiped his hands on his rag and knelt down to point. "You feel it. You hear it. Small vibrations, tiny shifts in pressure. Machines tell you things if you pay attention. Most people ignore them until it's too late." She nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "It's like listening to someone who can't speak." "That's one way to put it," he said with a small smile. They moved around the plane together, checking instruments, gauges, and valves. For the first time, Ethan noticed that Isabella didn't act like the other people who came to the hangar. She didn't rush him. She didn't question his methods, and she didn't expect special treatment. She simply watched and asked, quietly and patiently. After a while, they sat on a crate near the landing gear, catching their breath. Ethan had grease on his arms and dirt under his fingernails. Isabella had a smudge on her cheek from leaning too close to see a panel. They both laughed at the absurdity of it. The billionaire and the mechanic sitting together on a crate in a hangar full of humming machines. "You really love this work, don't you?" she asked softly. "It's not love," he said. "It's responsibility. If I don't do it right, people get hurt. I've seen what happens when things go wrong. That's enough reason to care." She was quiet for a moment, watching him. There was something honest in the way he spoke, something that didn't try to impress anyone. Most people in her world said the right things to sound important, but he spoke like his words meant something because they were true. "You remind me of someone I used to be," she said finally. Ethan looked at her curious. "Who's that?" "Someone who cared about making things better, even when no one was watching." "Before life became complicated," she admitted, her eyes distant. He nodded, understanding more than she might have realized. He didn't need wealth or fame to measure his life. Doing things the right way, protecting people, and keeping machines safe, that was enough. They spent the rest of the morning together, moving around the plane, checking systems, and occasionally pausing to discuss small details. She learned about fuel lines, hydraulic pumps, and engine diagnostics. He explained things patiently without the slightest hint of condescension. He spoke like someone who wanted her to understand, not like someone who wanted to impress. By midday, the plane was ready. Ethan wiped his hands and leaned against the wing, tired but satisfied. Isabella stood beside him, notebook in hand, scribbling notes here and there. "You really saved more than a plane yesterday," she said softly, almost to herself. He glanced at her. "Saved more?" "You," she said, smiling faintly. "You saved yourself too, in a way. You showed me something real, something I don't usually see in my world." Ethan felt a strange warmth, something he hadn't expected. People rarely noticed him beyond his work, and yet, here was someone who not only noticed him but seemed to understand him. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I just do my job." The rest doesn't matter." She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that made him look at her in surprise. Most people in her world didn't laugh like that. They smiled politely, nodded, and walked away. She laughed like she felt something. For the next few weeks, Isabella returned regularly, sometimes under the excuse of inspections, sometimes under the excuse of wanting to learn more. Every visit, she stayed longer, asking questions, watching him work, and slowly learning more about the man beneath the grease and dirt. Ethan at first didn't think much of it. He was used to people coming and going, people who were curious for a moment and then disappeared, but there was something different about Isabella. She listened, she remembered, and she never judged. One afternoon, as the sun started to dip toward the horizon, she stayed late with him. They sat on crates near the hangar doors, the orange light casting long shadows across the concrete floor. "You know," she said quietly, "I've spent my life surrounded by people who say yes to everything I do. But you tell the truth even when it's inconvenient, even when it's risky. That's rare." Ethan looked at her, unsure how to respond. Most people didn't value honesty over convenience. "I just don't see the point in lying," he said simply. She smiled, a little shyly. "I know. That's why I like being here with you. You make me forget the rest of it, the business, the meetings, the expectations. Here, it's just real." He nodded, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. A connection that didn't depend on money, status, or appearances. Just two people talking honestly, sharing a moment that belonged only to them. That evening, as she finally left, she paused at the gate. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For yesterday, for today, for showing me a part of life I've been missing." Ethan watched her drive away, the hum of the engine fading into the distance. He felt something shift inside him, though he couldn't yet name it. The next morning, he found a small envelope on his toolbox. Inside was a note in her handwriting. "Don't forget to look at the sky today. You might see something worth noticing." He smiled faintly, pocketed the note, and went to work. For the first time, he realized that someone from a world so different from his own was thinking about him too. Days passed, and their friendship grew quietly. She asked more questions, he explained more details, and slowly they began to understand each other. She learned about the long hours, the frustrations, and the small victories of his work. He learned about the pressures, the loneliness, and the hidden kindness behind her public persona. One evening, after finishing a routine inspection, they sat on the edge of the hangar, watching the sky turn purple and pink. She leaned back slightly, looking at him with a softness he hadn't seen before. "You ever wish life could be simpler?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Every day," he said honestly. "But simple doesn't always mean safe or right. You still have to do the hard things even if no one notices." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. "I think I like that about you. You don't need the world to see your worth. You just know it yourself." He looked down, feeling a warmth in his chest he couldn't explain. He wasn't used to being seen like this, and not for his hands, his sweat, or his work, but for him. For the first time, he understood that maybe, just maybe, someone could see past the grease, the dirt, and the quiet exterior, and care about what was inside. And Isabella, sitting beside him, felt something she hadn't felt in years. The rare comfort of someone who didn't care about her money, her fame, or her status. Someone who saw her as a person, not a headline. As the sky darkened, they stood together, finishing their work and preparing to close the hangar for the night. Neither spoke much on the way out. Words weren't needed. Their connection had grown quietly, naturally, and honestly, like a seed taking root in unexpected soil. And as the lights of the hangar dimmed behind them, both knew that their story, the story that had started with grease and a plane in trouble, was only beginning. The next few weeks passed quickly at the hangar. Ethan's days were full of engines, hydraulic lines, and the usual hum of machines, but there was a quiet anticipation in the air that he couldn't ignore. Isabella had started coming more frequently, sometimes under the pretense of checking on the plane, sometimes just to watch him work. Each visit was longer than the last, and she began asking more than just technical questions. She asked about his childhood, his first experiences with engines, and why he chose this work instead of something easier or more lucrative. Ethan was cautious at first. People rarely cared about him beyond his work. But with Isabella, it felt different. She wasn't asking to impress him or to show off her knowledge. She listened, really listened, and for the first time in years, he felt understood. One afternoon, as the sun was climbing high in the sky, the calm at the hangar was interrupted by the arrival of one of Isabella's assistants, looking anxious and out of breath. "Ma'am, there's a situation with one of the company jets. The engine pressure dropped mid-flight and the pilot needs guidance immediately." Isabella's face hardened. She had trained for emergencies like this, but something in her tone made it clear that she trusted no one but Ethan to advise. She looked at him. "Can you help?" He paused for a moment, then nodded. "I can guide them. I'll need the flight data and engine readouts right away." Within minutes, they were both looking at the streaming information from the plane's instruments. Ethan's eyes scanned every number, every gauge. The pressure drop was serious, and it could cause engine failure if not corrected quickly. "Tell the pilot to reduce thrust gradually," Ethan instructed, his voice calm but firm. "Shift to the auxiliary system and monitor hydraulic pressure closely. Do not make sudden moves. Keep it smooth." Isabella repeated his instructions to the pilot, her voice steady, betraying none of the anxiety she felt. She trusted him completely. Minutes felt like hours as they monitored the plane. Ethan's hands moved over the tablet, calculating adjustments and checking formulas. The assistant beside them tried to offer suggestions, but Isabella waved them away. She had confidence in Ethan. She had learned over the past weeks that he didn't panic. He thought clearly, acted fast, and cared about results, not recognition. Finally, the warnings on the screen began to stabilize. The pressure returned to normal, and the pilot confirmed that the jet could continue safely. Isabella let out a deep breath, feeling the tension leave her shoulders. She looked at Ethan, seeing him for what he truly was, not just a mechanic, but someone with the courage, intelligence, and skill to handle life or death situations calmly. "You did it," she said softly, awe in her voice. He shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed to be done. The plane, the passengers, everyone's safe. That's what matters." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on him longer than necessary. Something had shifted. This was no longer just curiosity or fascination. She respected him deeply, and she felt something more, a pull she hadn't expected. The days that followed were different. Their friendship began to feel like something more, even if neither of them said it out loud. Isabella continued to visit, sometimes staying late into the evening, asking questions about engines, about safety, about the small details that only someone who cared would notice. Ethan answered patiently, teaching her not just about machines, but about thinking clearly under pressure, about responsibility, about pride in work. But as their bond grew, so did the outside pressures. Word spread in Isabella's company that she was spending time with a mechanic at the hangar. Gossip started quietly, then louder, about why the billionaire was associating so closely with someone from a completely different world. Some of her advisors warned her, telling her to focus on work and appearances. "It's unprofessional," one said. "People will talk. It could affect your image." She listened politely, but inside she felt a quiet resistance. She had spent her life following rules and expectations, but something about Ethan made her question what really mattered. She wasn't sure if it was his honesty, his courage, or just the way he saw the world differently, but she knew she didn't want to step away from him. Meanwhile, Ethan felt the subtle tension from his coworkers. Some whispered about the billionaire who kept showing up at the hangar. Others joked that he should be careful about getting involved with someone so far above his life. He tried to ignore it. He had always worked with machines, not people's opinions. But for the first time, he wondered if his world and hers could really coexist. One afternoon, they were both at the hangar, performing routine checks on the plane before its next flight. The sun poured through the windows, casting golden light on the metal and grease-stained floor. Isabella watched as Ethan worked, his hands precise, his mind focused. "You know," she said quietly, "I never expected someone like you to exist in my world. Someone who doesn't care about money or fame, but still has this incredible sense of responsibility." Ethan paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "I never expected to meet someone like you either. Someone who doesn't just see the work I do, but sees me." She looked at him, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "I see more than that. I see someone brave, honest, and kind. That's rare, no matter what world you come from." He smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth twitching with amusement and warmth. "Kind, huh? You really know how to flatter a mechanic." She laughed softly, the sound echoing lightly in the hangar. "I'm serious," she said, shaking her head. "It's unusual to meet someone like you, and I'm grateful." For a moment, they simply stood together, quiet except for the hum of machines. There was a feeling in the air neither of them could name, a mix of tension, curiosity, and something deeper that neither wanted to rush. Later that week, a situation arose that tested their growing trust. One of Isabella's company planes developed a malfunction mid-flight again. The pilot was experienced but panicked slightly, as the engine showed signs of overheating. She called Ethan immediately, asking for guidance. Ethan's hands moved over the flight data with calm precision. Reduce speed and altitude gradually. Engage cooling systems and monitor temperature gauges. You have 30 minutes before critical failure. Isabella repeated his instructions firmly, keeping her own fear hidden. As the minutes passed, they watched the numbers stabilize. The engine cooled, the overheating stopped, and the plane continued safely to its destination. When the call ended, Isabella looked at Ethan, her expression serious but full of respect. "You didn't just save a plane," she said. "You saved me from worrying, from panic, from disaster. You handled this like it was nothing, and yet it could have been everything." He shook his head, still focused on logging the flight data. "I just know what to do. That's all." She leaned against the side of the hangar, her voice soft. "No, that's more than all. You stay calm when everything else is falling apart. You think, act, and protect. That's rare." Ethan finally looked at her, meeting her gaze. There was an unspoken understanding between them, respect, admiration, and a growing bond that neither had expected but couldn't deny. Over the following days, Isabella's visits became less about work and more about sharing time with him. They laughed together, discussed small details of engines, and occasionally talked about life outside the hangar. He learned about her childhood, the pressures she faced, and the loneliness of being in a world where people often cared more about her status than her as a person. She learned about his dreams, the simple joys of working with machines, and the quiet pride he took in doing things right. They became a team in ways that extended beyond engines and machines. She trusted him without question, and he guided her with patience and care. Their bond deepened quietly, naturally, and honestly, like roots growing underground before anyone notices. One evening, as they closed the hangar together, Isabella paused at the gate. "You know," she said softly, "I've met people all my life who wanted something from me. But you just want to fix things, and you care about people too." Ethan shrugged, a small smile on his face. "Someone has to," she smiled back, a faint blush on her cheeks. "And that's why I keep coming back. Not for the planes. For you." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, understanding the weight of her words. He had never expected this. He had never expected someone from her world to see him like that, to care. And as she walked to her car, leaving him at the hangar, he realized that the connection they shared was becoming something neither of them could ignore, something powerful and unexpected, built from respect, trust, and quiet admiration. That night, as he sat alone in the hangar after everyone left, Ethan thought about her words. The planes, the engines, the grease and sweat, they had always been his world. But now someone else had stepped into it. Someone who could see past the grime, past the noise, past the routine, and see him for who he really was. And somewhere across the city, Isabella was thinking the same thing. She had met countless people in her life, but none like him. Brave, honest, grounded, and completely unafraid to be himself, even when the world didn't care. Their story was no longer just about a plane, a job, or a few heroic moments. It was about trust, connection, and the quiet beginnings of something that neither of them could yet name. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the hangar earlier than usual, as he had done countless times before. The air smelled faintly of oil and dew, and the first rays of sunlight shimmered on the metallic wings of parked jets. He sipped his coffee slowly, listening to the distant hum of an engine starting somewhere in the distance. Today felt different, though he couldn't quite name why. As he checked his tools and prepared for the day, the familiar sound of a car approaching on the gravel path made him glance up. Isabella stepped out, dressed simply, her hair tied back, a small bag slung over her shoulder. Her expression was bright, and there was a light in her eyes he hadn't seen before, a mixture of anticipation and something more personal. "Good morning," she said softly, smiling at him. Morning, he replied, his hand still wrapped around the coffee cup. He noticed the small flutter in his chest, the way seeing her first thing in the morning made an ordinary day feel a little extraordinary. I thought I'd come early today, she said. I want to see the plane ready for its next flight, but I also wanted to spend a little time with you before it leaves. He raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Before it leaves? You mean just the two of us? Yes, she said, laughing lightly. Before anyone else arrives, before the rest of the world interrupts. For a moment, Ethan didn't respond. He had grown used to her visits, her curiosity, and the way she seemed to understand him. But today her words carried weight. They weren't just about planes or work. They were personal, and he felt it. They walked around the jet together, inspecting the wings and engines, checking fluid levels and gauges. Isabella asked questions, as she always did, but today her attention wasn't solely on the machine. Her eyes often drifted to him, watching the way he worked, the concentration on his face, the way he handled tools with care. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Ethan looked at her, curious. Next? After all of this, she said, gesturing to the plane, the hangar, the tools scattered around. After all the work, the routines, the emergencies. What do you want? For yourself? He paused, gripping the wrench a little tighter. Few people ever asked him that. Most just assumed he was content fixing engines and machines and didn't care about anything else. But she was different. She asked because she wanted to know, not because it served her in any way. I don't know, he admitted finally. I've never thought about it much. I've always been here, doing the work, fixing what's broken, making sure things are safe. That's enough, but he hesitated, looking down at the metal floor. Sometimes I wonder if there's more out there, something I'm missing because I'm too busy keeping everything running. She nodded slowly, her expression softening. I think I understand. I've spent so long chasing schedules, meetings, and results that I forgot what it feels like to just care about something. Truly, without expecting anything back. You remind me of that. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that he didn't recognize. It wasn't just pride or respect. It was something deeper, something personal. They continued their work together, moving through routine inspections, but the atmosphere had shifted. The jokes they exchanged were quieter, more intimate. The laughter came easier, and their silences were comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. Later, as the morning stretched into afternoon, Isabella suggested a test flight. I want to see it myself, she said, and I want you to come with me. Ethan blinked, surprised. Me? Yes, she said, smiling. You fixed it. You saved it. I want you there. I want to see this from your perspective. He hesitated. Mechanics don't usually fly in planes they repair. The risk, however small, was still there. But the look in her eyes, the trust, the hope, the quiet invitation, made him agree. They prepared the plane together, going through pre-flight checks. Isabella followed his instructions carefully, asking questions when she didn't understand. For Ethan, it was strange to see someone from her world handling the tools, the panels and the levers with such curiosity and focus. It was thrilling and oddly comforting to have her right there beside him, sharing the responsibility. When the engines roared to life, the hangar seemed to vibrate around them. Ethan guided her through the startup sequence, his voice calm, steady, and confident. Everything looks perfect. The instruments are stable. We're ready, she nodded, gripping the edge of the cockpit, her eyes meeting his. I trust you, she said softly. Those words hit him in a way he couldn't ignore. Trust wasn't given lightly, especially by someone like her. And yet here it was, offered freely, without pretense or condition. The plane lifted smoothly into the sky, the hum of engines surrounding them. Ethan pointed out different controls and systems, explaining their purpose, their limits, and the subtle signs to watch for. Isabella listened intently, absorbing everything, but also watching him. She watched the way his hands moved, how he stayed calm under pressure, how he spoke softly yet confidently. As they reached cruising altitude, the city below shrinking into a patchwork of colors, Isabella leaned back slightly and said, You make it all look so easy. Ethan chuckled. It's not easy. It's just practice. And attention. You learn to respect the machine and it respects you back. She smiled, but there was something more in her eyes now. Admiration, yes, but also something tender. Something that made his heart beat faster than the engines beneath them. For a while they flew in silence, just the two of them, high above the world. And for the first time Ethan felt a freedom he had never known, not just because of the flight, but because of her presence. She didn't care about his appearance, his background, or the grease on his hands. She cared about him. After a few minutes, she spoke again, quieter this time. You know, I've spent my life surrounded by people who want things from me. Money, influence, status. But you don't, you just care. About people, about machines, about doing things right. That's rare. Ethan looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. I don't do it for recognition, he said. I do it because it matters. Because it keeps people safe. That's enough for me. She reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. You make me want to care about things differently. You make me want to remember what it feels like to trust, to believe in something real. The plane banked gently, the sunlight reflecting off the wings, and for a moment the world felt suspended, quiet and perfect. Ethan's gaze met hers, and in that silent exchange they both understood something unspoken. They had crossed the boundaries of their worlds. They had seen each other, really seen each other, in a way no one else could. When they finally landed, the engines slowing and the wheels touching the runway smoothly, neither spoke immediately. The hangar waited, the planes idle, the day continuing around them. But for a moment they existed only in that shared space. Ethan shut down the engines, wiping his hands on the rag he always carried. Isabella stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For the plane, for today, for showing me a world I didn't know existed. He looked at her, unsure how to respond. I didn't do it for thanks, but I'm glad it helped. She smiled, a warmth in her expression that went beyond words. It helped me more than you know, and it's made me realize something. I don't want this connection to end because of our worlds. I want you in my life, not just as the mechanic who saved my plane, but as you. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. No one had ever said anything like that to him. No one had ever wanted him for who he was, without conditions, without expectations. And now, the woman who had seemed so untouchable, so far away from his life, was saying she wanted him. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. I want that too, he said quietly. I don't care about worlds or money or status. I care about what's real. And right now, this is real. She smiled, a soft, happy smile, and for the first time she felt free from the pressures of her world. She felt seen, appreciated, and safe, not just in her body, but in her heart. In the weeks that followed, their bond grew stronger. Isabella continued to trust Ethan in every aspect of her planes, her schedules, and even her personal life. He became not just her mechanic, but her confidant, her partner in decisions, and someone she could rely on completely. Ethan's life changed too. He found that the world he had always known, grease, engines, hard work, could now hold something more. Someone who saw him, valued him, and loved him for who he was. He discovered that courage and kindness didn't go unnoticed, and that sometimes life had a way of bringing the right people together at exactly the right moment. One afternoon, as they sat together in the hangar, the sun streaming through the open doors, Isabella turned to him with a small, quiet laugh. You know, I never thought I'd fall for a mechanic covered in grease. But here I am, Ethan smiled, wiping his hands again, and I never thought I'd meet a billionaire who'd see me for me. But here we are. They laughed together, the sound echoing in the empty hangar. Outside, the world continued, planes taking off and landing, people rushing, deadlines looming. But inside that space, they had found something rare: trust, respect, love, and the understanding that some connections are stronger than any world, any status, or any expectation. And as the sun set behind the hangar, painting the sky in gold and pink, they stood together, hands clasped, hearts aligned, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they had found something real, something lasting, something worth fighting for. Ethan, the mechanic covered in grease, and Isabella, the billionaire who had learned to see beyond the world she knew, had discovered that love, respect, and trust could rise from the unlikeliest of places, and that sometimes the people who save your life can also save your heart.